Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Anti-Doping Podcast, brought to you by the Partnership for Clean Competition. I'm your host, Dr. Marie McNeely, and today we are joined by our guest, Dr. Alka Beotra. Listeners, Alka is director of the WADA-Accredited Qatar Doping Analysis Laboratory and Qatar Athlete Passport Management Unit. And in our interview, she's going to share more about the Anti-Doping Lab Qatar, her career in anti-doping, as well as preparations for the upcoming 2022 FIFA World Cup. So Alka, welcome to our show today. How are you?
All good. Hello, Marie. Hello, everyone.
Wonderful. We are excited to welcome you to the show. Alka, can you start by telling us more about the Qatar Doping Analysis Control Laboratory and the history?
Yes. The idea to have a lab in Qatar was conceptualized in December 2007 at the GCC summit. Professor Mohammed Al-Madid, who is the chair of ADLQ's Board of Trustees, was appointed as director of the project, and a presentation was made to WADA in February 2008 to seek support. In 2011, by Amiri decree, ADLQ was declared as independent entity reporting directly to His Highness, the Amir of the State of Qatar. The ADLQ building, which was nothing at that time, was inaugurated by His Highness Sheikh Tamim bin Hamad Al Thani, who is the current Amir, in December 2012. The lab got WADA accreditation for ABP in 2014, with full accreditation achieved in 2015. So you may see it is a young lab.
Definitely. And what are the goals and the mission of the laboratory there?
The mission of ADLQ is to be at the forefront of the fight against doping in sports, fostering excellence in research and education, and enhancing the skills of Qatari nationals. Just giving a bit more about scientific, as I said, to be always on the forefront of recent advancements in anti-doping. In education, the mission is to select and then sponsor our staff, not only scientific, but from other, for undergraduate, masters, right through the PhD levels, regarding regulatory requirements like any other lab, following mandatory standards like ISO 17025 and WADA standard. In addition to these, the lab is following ISO 31000 and ISO 22301, which are not mandatory standards, but comes as best practice for risk assessment and for business continuity management.
Definitely. And it sounds like you guys are very rigorous in terms of the work that you do there in the lab. Can you tell us a little bit more about how the lab is organized, maybe the different components of it, and what your roles are there, Alka?
In the last 10 years, since I'm talking about from the inauguration till now, ADLQ has evolved significantly. When I joined initially, my role was as Risk and Quality Director, responsible for the 3 labs within ADLQ: Doping Analysis Lab, Toxicology and Multipurpose Lab, and Life Sciences and Research Lab. Unlike all other WADA-accredited labs, where the labs are mostly part of the university, hospital, or a private institution catering to various services like clinical, forensic, analytical, and anti-doping, ADLQ was established as a standalone organization. Therefore, it had to produce its support from within as much as it is possible. So the first step towards this was to have an additional lab, which was the TMPL, Toxicology and Multipurpose, with expertise in the same technology as doping analysis while working on other areas, which may be utilized as per the need for the main activity of doping analysis lab if required. This worked well and helped with the increased sample load, for which the support within the organization was available. So later, I took over TMPL in addition to Risk and Quality, and finally as Director Doping Analysis Lab. So now ADLQ is mostly like all WADA labs with doping analysis lab and research.
Oh, interesting. And this toxicology and multipurpose lab sounds fascinating. I think most of our listeners will be familiar with the term toxicology, but can you tell us what might fall into this kind of multipurpose bucket of the lab?
It was catering to basically the toxicology and multipurpose lab focused on to the consumer safety testing. So we worked on various parameters like various kinds of tests, whatever is used within Qatar. So that is tested prior to being released to the customer. So that relates to the items, what are used by the consumers. It can be a drink, which shouldn't be having an element of caffeine beyond a limit. It can be a paper plate, which should not be having. It can be a supplement or the shampoos, what are used. So all these to be tested as per the regulatory requirements acceptable in Qatar for import of material.
So can you go into a little bit more detail, Alka, about some of these key services that the lab provides for the anti-doping community?
ADLQ is doing routine testing of urine and blood samples as per WADA requirements and catering to more than 30 countries across the world, mainly in West Asia and Africa, and very few from Europe. To name few of the countries, apart from Qatar, of course, are Kuwait, Oman, Malaysia, Indonesia, Singapore, Philippines, Kenya, Ethiopia, Hong Kong, Greece, India. Annual number of samples which is being done in our lab is 6 to 10,000.
Oh, wow. That's amazing. So is it difficult to coordinate providing service to all of these different countries?
I don't really feel that way. The understanding of different countries or different clients may vary, but on the whole, we don't find really difficult to deal with. Many of these clients I am familiar who were sending earlier to India. So it's practically the same concept of catering to different countries. It's a bit unusual here that the number is too vast to which we are covering.
Certainly. And we mentioned in our introduction, Alka, that you're also in charge of the Qatar Athlete Passport Management Unit, or APMU. So can you tell our listeners a little bit more about what APMUs do and why they're so important in anti-doping?
The Athlete Passport Management Unit is a dedicated unit responsible for the timely management of athlete biological passports in ADAMS. The concept in this is to monitor the longitudinal profiles of individual athletes with respect to several indirect markers, which are altered due to the use of prohibited substances or methods and remain altered for longer period than the direct indicators of the substance detected in the anti-doping samples. So it's advantageous to apply this indirect approach. If I say it in a simple words, the concept of passport, we travel to various places and the same gets stamped onto our passport. Like this, an athlete is tested number of times in different competitions, different countries. The profile, both hematological and steroidal, submitted on ADAMS gets matched with the passport and updated profile is made automatically by the adaptive model in ADAMS. So as soon as any new report or a profile is submitted, a notification of the update comes to the passport custodian and to APMU. And this notification is monitored by APMU, and any deviation from the normal values of that particular athlete is flagged to see if it is due to a medical condition or probable doping. And it triggers target testing for a particular athlete, either for EPO through hematological module or IRMS testing through steroidal module to differentiate the origin of testosterone or its precursor. Since 2019, the WADA-Accredited labs are defined as the host organization for APMU, At present, it is for hematological and steroidal module. It will be expanded for endocrine module in due course of time. And currently, there are 16 APMU worldwide, which means out of 30 WADA-accredited labs, 16 also host APMU. And we in Qatar are catering to the anti-doping organization of approximately these 10 clients from Ethiopia, Singapore, Brunei, Kuwait, Qatar, Cambodia, and Philippines.
Oh, that makes sense. So do you know off the top of your head, Alka, about how many different athlete passports you're managing?
The minimum criteria or the minimum requirement what is to really have an APMU and to be able to maintain accreditation is 500. And we are doing much more than that. I won't say the number is very high as we are doing sample testing, but it is definitely 700 plus.
Oh, that's fantastic. And can you touch on just a little bit about why this athlete passport management unit is so important for anti-doping, or why these athlete biological passports are so important for anti-doping?
The reason is, you see, as I said earlier, the use of exogenous substances. If an athlete has taken a drug and how long it is detected into the system is one way of doing the detection. The indirect biomarkers are compared to the athlete's own value. The more number of these values give an idea to the experts, any deviation anywhere attempted by the athlete. So it is not linked to the time of collection of one particular sample. So many samples collected over a time period, and the upper and lower limits of the passport keeps changing depending on the number and the values of the athlete in that. And these indirect biomarkers help a lot to target testing for a particular athlete for getting to the doping, to finding the cause.
Certainly, that makes sense. And you're doing some amazing work there at the Anti-Doping Lab Qatar. What has your experience been like working there?
For me, working in anti-doping field is like for more than 3 decades. I served in Indian Anti-Doping Lab for more than 26 years in various positions and retiring as a director in 2016. At that time, the lab was doing approximately 10,000 samples for both human and animal doping. So for me, working and understanding the anti-doping lab work environment was a familiar thing, except the difference of working in a lab with different nationalities, which is an experience in itself. As a founder member of Indian Anti-Doping Lab, which started in 1990, we did test for Afro-Asian Games with IOC accreditation of Tokyo Lab. The Indian lab got WADA accreditation in 2008, and we did test for Singapore Youth Olympic Games, which were held in Singapore, and Commonwealth Games, which were held in New Delhi in 2010. So experience of working in a lab for many years and working for the major games, that too working with IOC accreditation to WADA accreditation. So pretty familiar to the field for many years.
Absolutely. And what is it like specifically working there at the Anti-Doping Lab Qatar? Are there particular things that you like about it?
The best part of the Qatar anti-doping, I think I missed somewhere else because of the diversity, one, of the nationalities, two, of the infrastructure in terms of equipment, in terms of the experience which comes from the various countries, and the diversity of the work also what we had in the beginning, and the logic behind that of having the TMPL and having the research lab and the expertise within the research lab, which are pretty unique to the and rare in the WADA-accredited laboratories, which would, of course, be covered by my colleague later on.
So you mentioned that you've got 3 decades here in anti-doping. Alka, how did you initially become interested in anti-doping and find your way to this field?
I did my PhD in 1981, and joined a premier institute in Delhi, where my work was on analysis of various drugs in different projects related to anti-tuberculosis or rheumatoid arthritis. But all the techniques utilized for drug analysis were high-performance liquid chromatography, gas chromatography. So during that time, I got to know about the plan of Sports Ministry to set up an anti-doping lab, which was very close to the institute I was working. I decided to apply and joined in 1990 as a founder member to set up the lab.
Oh, interesting. And you mentioned some of these key career moments along your path there, but what brought you ultimately to the Anti-Doping Lab Qatar?
As I said, in the Indian lab, I retired in 2016. And after that, I got a call from Qatar lab. I was familiar with Qatar lab. I had visited here earlier for attending the ADLQ symposium twice. And then I got an invite from here to join for the quality position, risk and quality director. And that was something very interesting for me. And that's how it began. And now it's over 5 years. I'm continuing and working in this lab.
Definitely. And you mentioned that you've got a lot of experience in anti-doping. You've worked at 2 different anti-doping laboratories. So from your experience, Alka, what are some of the things that you think the Anti-Doping Lab Qatar does particularly well?
I would just name 3 of the things here. The first one is the ADLQ gives a lot of emphasis on training, for which a training management unit is in place to suggest and monitor progress of each scientist and other staff members. So while the technical part of the training is managed by the labs, the other areas of development, including management skills, leadership, are managed by the training management unit. And it is a real strength of ADLQ, emphasizing on each and every scientist training plan. Secondly, it's relatively a well-funded lab, having the best of the latest equipment. And thirdly, the expertise in molecular and metabolomics, which is unique to ADLQ, unlike the other WADA-accredited labs.
Oh, interesting. And I love this idea of a training management unit. This is the first time I've heard the term. So how did that come about? And I guess, how does that unit operate and help support training?
There are training goals which are established right in the beginning of the year. And all through the year, how those training for each person would be monitored. It is done through the appraisal system, which is biannual. And in 6 months, it is seen how much a person has achieved. So as I said, the technical part is monitored by the lab, but the other trainings are all organized by the training management unit, where each and every scientist is approached through them and followed up through them about whether they have attended all these trainings, which are on the management skills and all. And we are required to give our feedback on the concerned line manager is required to give the feedback onto the training and acquired by a particular scientist. And it's working very well.
Oh, interesting. Well, it sounds like the Qatar Lab has a lot of different strengths there, which is important because there are a lot of challenges in anti-doping to address. So what are some of the biggest challenges, Alka, that ADLQ is facing right now?
I would say the biggest challenge is the critical mass, the lack of nationals as personnel at various levels. So, as I said, there are more of the expats working here. So, succession planning is how the lab is working around it. And that also comes through the training management unit, where they identify people for each position through the succession planning. Right now, we have identified around 12 persons under different positions, and they are monitored through to reach the level what is expected by them. And second challenge is to resources like consumables and reference standards. We have to really wait long to get these things from Europe and USA.
Definitely. And I think this challenge you mentioned is, again, something that I hadn't heard people mention before, but the succession planning, maintaining the continuity of talented, skilled lab staff, I think is a huge challenge in a lot of research laboratories across the world. So I'm really glad you brought that point up. And I know many of our listeners out there may be excited and looking forward to the FIFA World Cup that's going to be held in Qatar later this year in November and December of 2022. So Alka, can you tell us a little bit more about how Anti-Doping Lab Qatar will be involved in this big event?
We are looking forward to contributing for the testing of FIFA World Cup. The contract for the testing is signed already. Both urine and blood samples will be analyzed, and turnaround time will be as per the contract with FIFA. The lab will be receiving and analyzing samples from November 12th to December 15th. End of December, practically, till time the event is there.
Interesting. And it seems like for a big event like this, you've got to do some preparation, some planning in advance. So Alka, can you tell us a little bit more about what you and the lab members there at ADLQ are going to need to do leading up to this big event to host it?
The lab is well resourced with equipment and manpower. To overcome few shortfalls, we have trained our scientists working in the other lab by reducing other activities, and focus right now is on being ready for the World Cup. So it's a planned process to reduce activities of other labs so that scientists can be put into training schedule in doping analysis lab. In addition, as prevalent in other events across the world, ADLQ will invite few experts from other WADA-Accredited labs. I would like to say here that ADLQ has experience of doing testing for big events like Jakarta Asian Games, which were held in 2018, for which samples came to Doha. And later in 2019, we did testing for World Athletic Championship and Asian Athletic Championship. The number of samples handled for these events were 1,000 to 1,600 approximately. So though it is a young lab, but it has experience of handling bigger number in a span of limited time.
I think that experience will definitely come in handy here with this upcoming event. And I guess looking towards the future there at ADLQ, what are some of the big goals that the lab is working towards in the next 5 to 10 years?
To continue and maintain excellence in human doping, both in routine and research, because whatever we may do, still a lot is to be done. So maintaining that excellence is important. In addition, for animal doping, we are already ISO accredited for testing of animal samples, both horses and camels. We plan to expand on that in coming years to utilize additional trained manpower to work on animal doping control. As the membership of World Association of Anti-Doping Scientists is important to human doping, membership of Association of Racing Chemists is important for animal testing. So I have professional membership of AORC, and it's very useful to get all the content which is available for professional members from the animal testing from the AORC. In addition, like any other country where maximum number of positions are filled by locals, there is a need as per government in Qatar to introduce for Qatarization so as to reduce dependence on expat scientists. So there is succession planning for each position to ensure achieving Qatarization for maximum number of positions.
Interesting. And you mentioned in terms of animal doping, both horse racing and camel racing. I know in the US, a lot of our listeners out there might be familiar with horse racing and some of the considerations with that sport. For looking at camel racing, is it relatively similar to horse racing in terms of the anti-doping testing measures?
The testing is practically similar, but the regulatory requirements are more stringent in horses than what these are in camels, because it's not really at the moment those kind of stringent regulatory requirement, except following ISO 17025 standard.
Well, Alka, we've covered a lot of ground, and I'm curious, you mentioned some of the challenges, some of the limitations that you face in anti-doping. If we took away a lot of the barriers that normally hold you back and gave you all of the resources you could possibly imagine, is there one problem in anti-doping science that you would want to address most?
It's an ongoing process. And as an anti-doping scientist, I would always wish to be able to reach a stage when no dope athlete shall ever escape getting caught, and no innocent athlete shall ever be falsely caught. If that is achieved, we all have done our job well. We all are working towards it, and harmonization is the key to achieve by all who are involved. It has come a long way since the establishment of WADA. In my career, I have seen the evolution of this, but of course, there is more to be done, perhaps by better collaboration and harmonization by all the stakeholders to achieve this.
Absolutely. I think there are some big challenges ahead and a lot of work for you to do, certainly. But if our listeners are intrigued by the conversation we have today and they want to learn more about you and more about what's going on at ADLQ, what's the best way for them to do so?
It is through the published papers, conference proceedings, and through emails that they can send any of their queries.
Excellent. Well, listeners, definitely check out some of the great research papers that are coming out of ADLQ. You can find those on PubMed and other repositories. And Alka, it was such a pleasure to chat with you today. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much, Mary. It was nice talking to you.
We appreciate you joining us on the show, listeners. Great to have you here as well. And if you haven't had a chance yet, we would truly appreciate it if you could subscribe to, rate, and review our show on your favorite podcast platform. And listeners, please note that the Anti-Doping Podcast features a wide variety of clean sport experts, and episodes may include statements and or viewpoints that do not necessarily reflect the views or values of the PCC. Thank you, and we look forward to seeing you on the next episode of the Anti-Doping Podcast.